Láta mannin hafa mikrofón.
Can I ask a question?
Já, byrja þú.
You see, I want to emphasize that very impressed with both of your talks, and I hardly disagree with any in it, except I'm a little bit concerned about this idea to close hospitals. Although hospitals are among the houses I try to avoid, and everyone should try to avoid hospitals, but medicine is becoming more and more technological. The most important advances in medicine over the past quarter of a century have been technological and very, very difficult to provide those services in community centers. I also want to emphasize that the idea to close psychiatric wards is an old one. And there was a movement in the United States just before 1980 that we would have to let all psychiatric patients out to state mental health institutions. And Ronald Reagan had it done in the beginning of his reign. And that created the homelessness in America. So this isn't quite that simple. I love this beautiful vision of the world. It reminds me of the vision that Sveinn Rúnar and I had half a century ago, all right? A bit old one, but, and psychiatry is not a great discipline, I agree with you, but still, those of us who have had close relatives who have become psychotic, those of us who have close relatives who have been serious addicts, we have probably had greater difficulty surviving without the opportunity of institutions where people are cared for a while.
So, can I respond? Can you hear me?
I would love to listen to a response from you.
So, yeah, I'll take this one. Okay, so I wasn't saying necessarily to close down physical hospitals, and I agree that there are some very high-tech things that go on in them, but I still think that if you've got a physical health problem and you don't require too much high-tech, you're better in a smaller place. I was talking about psychiatric hospitals and wards, and in New Zealand we have, in Wellington, we have 5 community houses, crisis houses, where people go as an alternative to the ward. Now, they have a much better time in those houses than they do in the ward. And there's some evidence that if you have a place where people stay and you've got more than 15 beds in it, you start to get very institutional and some very bad things start happening. And I know that in some parts of the world, like Trieste, they have just about done away with hospital admissions, and they do it in the community, and it works. So the other thing I want to say is that when Reagan, when they emptied out the state hospitals in the US, they didn't provide people with supports, and that's why they ended up homeless and in prison. And that's really important. You just don't chuck people out of hospital, especially if they've been living there for a long time, and say you're going to fend for yourself, because they do that very well in America. They say you fend for yourself, and they did it very, very badly. That does not mean it can't work.
I really both agree and disagree with both of you, and that's very nice, because I see your concern, because in Norway we have closed a lot of hospitals, And it's not necessarily a good thing, because the people with the most severe mental illnesses get less treatment and less support. And that's probably the most important. They live at home, as I described in my speech. They are lonely and they got medication and very little else. But if you get what you are describing, supported housing, places where people can come when they want to, stay for a few days until they feel better, places where they can get support from different kind of professionals, not only nurses, but cultural workers and peer support and whatever, over time, I think that will be a much better solution than, so it's not in hospital for 20 years or outside on the street alone. You must have something in between.
I think it is inevitable that Sveinn is going to ask a question.
He got his microphone, just fending for himself. Very good. Gjör svo vel, Sveinn.
It will be a speech. No. My name is Sveinn Rúnar, as my friend Kári pointed out, and I am a psychotic addict by experience. I am also a physician, a GP, and I must begin to thank you very much, all three of you, for your contributions. What I want to ask you about is mainly concerning Mary's contribution, which was, and then I talk about the psychiatry, the big psychiatry harm, and what I see as most important, as it is for physicians in general and for us all, is to prevent harm. And a lot of harm in the psychiatry, in my opinion, has to do with the coercion, as you name it. You might also use the word violence, because it is direct, physical, and psychological violence, which the people who come into the psychiatric system have to experience. I have my own experience of this, not from a cell like our Norwegian friend described, but from the treatment that you are attacked by a group of people, put to the floor or wherever, and then injected by large doses of antipsychotics. In my case, it was 16 milligrams of haloperidol 4 times a day. Every time I entered the psychiatric ward for my swings. We have this is more concrete what I want to ask you about Mary. How far have you come along in repealing the mental health laws? We don't have a special mental health law in Iceland. We have the what you call maybe the law of competence. In Icelandic it is lögræðislög, and there is a paragraph there, 28, which gives the doctor on duty, the psychiatrist on duty, the right. Of course, it is stated that it is forbidden to do it, but then comes a comma, but the doctor on duty has the right, if the patient is a danger to himself or others, to inject, to give him what we call coercive treatment, which in Iceland is this physical violence and an injection of medicine. I've been through this myself several times. I will state that, and I don't think you can find anyone who will say that I haven't even I never hit even Kauri. I have never hit a person in my life. Maybe I didn't dare to. I never hit anyone. I never harmed anyone physically. I never even thought of harming myself physically. So I did not fit into this, but still it is always used, because when you give a doctor or any person a power over other persons in this way, it is misused. What have you in New Zealand done about this? I guess you have some, because what they say always, but what can we else do?
I think that's the question there.
We are not ready
to... Give Mary a chance to respond.
What can we else do?
What have they done?
The question, of course, for me is, the answer to that is, of course, we have to know, first of all, what we cannot do to other people.
Yeah.
And then we will start answering the other one, how we can help people.
So in New Zealand we have a special Mental Health Act, and I think this is discriminatory. It's based on danger to self or others, and I think they have a lower threshold for depriving people of their liberty in the Mental Health Act than they do in other legislation for the rest of the population. So when they are going to repeal the Mental Health Act, and I think there should be a general competency-based act, but this is full of fishhooks. And one of them is what you pointed out in section 28. Now, one of the problems is with a lot of this legislation, the doctor, they get into trouble sometimes when they don't use it, but they never get into trouble if they use it badly. And so you would need to build in a censure for using the Act, not within the criteria, and as well as because they get worried, well, if I don't put this person under the Act, I might get into trouble, or my organisation, the media will say, why didn't you force this person? So I don't know if that answers your question, but here, do you want...
But I have a little comment I would like to make on your idea of the community services. I don't think that big psychiatry is quite as bad as you say it is. Or let's put it this way, I don't think it is just bad because of what it is. I think it is more bad because of what it is not. So patients go into psychiatric wards, in Iceland at least, and when they are sent home, there is nothing awaiting them. So I think that there is a real need, there is a real place for psychiatric wards, because there are serious psychosis, there are serious addictive problems, etc., that is difficult to deal with out in the community. But I don't think that psychiatric wards are places where people should be for a long time. And I think it's extraordinarily important for the patient and for their families to have something that takes over once they leave the hospital, and that is missing in Iceland completely.
You asked specifically what could we else do, and in Norway right now we have a Mental Health Act, just as in New Zealand. But I was in this group, and in June we have worked for 3 years writing a new law, a completely new law that will be common for all people in Norway, with and it's competence-based, not based on diagnosis but on competence. So if you are unconscious or can't take care of yourself because you're unconscious, it's for everyone. Dementia, addiction, and it's very competence-based. We have several restrictions for forced treatment. First of all, you can make a reservation. You can say, I've tried antipsychotic, I will never have that again. So then you can never be treated by forced medication again or ECT for the rest of your life, or until you make another decision, of course. We have also a completely new law that after 30 days, the psychiatrists have to apply to an outside commission, may I please continue to use forced treatment for these patients. It's not the patient that can say, I don't want it. It's the, of course they can do that if you want, but the psychiatrists have to apply to a commission that will see on all the cases, could we done something different? Is it possible to do it? I can't go through the whole law now. It's in 800 pages in Norwegian, so it's very, very complex. But yes, there are a lot of other ways to do it, really.
Just a correction, there was a misunderstanding. It is not my question what else to do. I reject that question. I say we shall first find out what we cannot do to patients. And just to mention it, that here in Iceland, you will hear, if you turn to some people in the official people, they will tell you that there is very little coercion in Icelandic psychiatry. The fact is that 1/3 of the psychiatric admissions are on compulsory basis. 30% of them are. And there is a lot of coercion. And when I tell about my personal experience, it was long time ago. It was the last one in '85. But they are not doing this anymore, are they? They are. This is all going on every day. And we need to do something about this before we then also answer the question, what can be done to help people without coercion, without treating them badly?
Maybe one or two more questions?
Sure. This is absolutely correct. We should not be using physical violence against patients or people who are in trouble. But one of the things in Tiny is not a defense for the physical violence, but defense for the desperation that is often found around people who end in psychosis, that family and friends become terrified and they don't know how to respond. And some of the ugly things that happen have their roots in this despair. It doesn't justify anything, but it's a tiny little bit of an explanation as to why strange things happen, right?
Hello, my name is Sylvia. I am curious about the peer supporting system, because we are trying here in Iceland to start with this sort of help for people, and it's quite difficult to be recognized like the peer supporting. Everybody is thinking it's a good thing, but it's very difficult to have the possibility for people who want to support like peers to work in the system. Or it's work in New Zealand and in Norway.
So yes, we have a growing peer support workforce in New Zealand. It's less than 5% of the whole workforce, but we want to grow it a lot more. Because relating to your comment about people being afraid of people who are psychotic, I think people who have been through the experience themselves may be less afraid of people who are psychotic. And there are, you know, the Hearing Voices movement, they have developed approaches to working with people who hear voices and who have psychosis that are very calming and not violent. So, but we are working very hard to increase the peer support workforce, and we are creating a qualification for this workforce. And we want to create a professional association and also for people to be able to be educated and to move forward in this role.
Okay, we're pretty much out of time. This has been very informative and fun as well. and I think there's a broad agreement, maybe a bit broader agreement than one would have assumed at first. I think it's a matter of also how you frame things. I think, as Dr. Stefánsson said, it's not just a matter of what you don't do, it's a matter of what you do instead. And there are actually some very good models from organizations such as the World Health Organization as to how you implement community-based services, and it explicitly advises against just closing things down instead of making sure that something else is in place to take over. So the experience in the 80s that we had in the US, where the primary motivation was to save money, was an example of a bad way how to go about changing things. So it's a matter of having a vision of what comes instead of what we have before, and also how we can work with the good things that we have in place already. So that's why we're very honored and grateful to have you to come and show us some roadmaps as to how it can be done. So thanks again very much.